Welcome into this Telstra virtual event. I'm Justin Cleveland, your host. And before we get into the topic, I do want to draw your attention to some of the functionality here of the On24 platform. There are some widgets you'll see along the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to download a copy of the presentation today. So don't worry about all of the stats, all of the numbers, and all of the information that's coming at you. You'll be able to get a copy of that right there along the bottom of the screen. Also, if you want to ask a question, at any point you have something that is important to ask, you think that you want to get answers, we actually have security specialists sitting in the room here today able to answer your questions. So please feel free to ask us questions at any point during our event today. So we are talking today about digital security trends in the Australian market. And frankly, as recent as 50 years ago, all you needed to secure your business was a big dog or a big lock or a big security guard. That's all you really needed in order to make sure that your business was safe and secure. But today, people targeting your business, well, they're not just your competitors trying to get your information or trying to get a hold of your customer data. Attacks can come from a range of sources and in forms that you and I today can't even imagine tomorrow what could happen. So card skimmers, spoofing, that's really child's play compared to some of the stuff that can happen to your network and to your business. In fact, I just read a story about online impressions and online fraud being committed in advertising through malware and compromised PCs, essentially driving up the numbers of clicks and views for advertising, meaning that a company had to pay out a lot of money in advertising costs without actually getting the benefit of that advertising. It's a significant chunk of change and something that a year or two ago we never would have thought to look for. It's just one of the myriad ways that mischief makers are impacting businesses today. So we all know about the breaches at like Dropbox and iCloud or at retailers like Home Depot or Target in the U.S. In some cases, that was the result of brute force. In others, it was sophisticated tools. And in others still, it was just somebody who left the back door open and allowed information to get out. So what are modern security threats and what can you do to protect your business? It's an important question. And that's why I'm being joined today by, first of all, Dave Shepard. He is the General Manager of Market Development for Telstra Security Practice. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Justin. And just briefly want to say thank you to everyone for taking time out of their day to join us on the phone today.
And also joining us is Danny Ristevsky. He's the General Manager of the Center for Excellence in Telstra's Security Practice. Good morning, Danny.
Hi, Justin, and hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here with our audience on the call this morning.
All right, and so we do have a lot we're going to cover over today, so I do thank you for joining us, and again, remind you, you can ask questions at any point through the widgets at the bottom of your screen, and also download a copy of this presentation there in the Resources tab. So before we get too deep into the weeds, Dave, I'm going to ask you the question, is there a magic bullet? Is there one thing that we can do to solve all security problems in the digital sphere?
I wish I could answer yes, but clearly the answer is no, and that's why more than 350 people have registered to attend this session this morning, Justin.
Excellent. So why don't we get started and start out, we're going to talk through some of the threats that are out in the security sphere today and some of the things that we can do. Before we get in, why don't you go ahead and take us through?
Cool. So thanks, Justin, and thanks again, everyone, for joining on the call today. Just want to kind of provide a little bit of context leading into this presentation today. Firstly, around the audience that we're talking to. As I mentioned briefly a moment ago, more than 350 people have registered to attend this morning's online event, which shows just how challenging, interesting, and important this topic is to so many of us. And looking at the registrations in a bit more detail, there are a number of enterprise brands who are represented. But unsurprisingly, the majority of people joining the call are from SMB organisations. What I find particularly interesting is that the vast majority of job titles are not from information security. They're not even from IT. In fact, I'd estimate that fewer than 20% of the people on the phone are from security roles, and less than 50% come from IT. We do, however, have plenty of COOs, CFOs, and CEOs on board this morning, which highlights a couple of important points. The first of which is that the cyber issue has definitely got the attention of the business, of the executive, and of the board. And the second one is that the vast majority of SMB organisations don't have a dedicated security person among their staff. And so the responsibility ultimately lies with the executive. So the aim of this session is to look into a number of security challenges facing this kind of small and medium market, and more importantly, kind of look at what they can do about it. So we'll be sharing insights and findings from our soon-to-be released 2014 Cyber Security Report. Now, we had hoped to have that report available for everyone immediately following this session, but we're just working through final approvals and we anticipate it being available within the week. So I just wanted to kind of make that clear right from the start. So let me start today's session with some scene setting that I want people to try and relate to their own organisations. So the internet has just transformed the way we all work. All this innovation in areas like IT service provision, cloud computing, social platforms, mobile, and the rise and adoption of kind of BYO everything has just led to fantastic opportunities for all of our businesses, and everyone's kind of racing to take advantage. We want to reach new markets, we want to drive productivity, we want to deliver a better experience for end users and for our customers. And at Telstra, we're very passionate about creating a brilliant connected future for everyone. We believe that privacy, trust and confidence are just key pillars of that state. So online has helped to make geographical borders a thing of the past when it comes to how and where we do business, and possibly kind of company perimeters even more so. So the digital boundary that surrounds our businesses or organisations has just become thinner and is increasingly blurred.
I want to stop you really quick because you mentioned a term that I think people know. You mentioned BYO. That we're not talking about bringing in wine to your business. We're talking about the myriad of different connected devices that we can bring in.
That's right.
So why don't you run me through quickly why is that an issue?
So we're going to cover it a little later in the presentation, but basically users are kind of driving technology choices and technology direction for organisations. You know, the Gen Ys, the Gen Zs that are coming into the business now have grown up with a mobile or a tablet in their hands, and that's just how they want to work. So the way we're used to working is not the way we're going to be working in the future, and the users are going to drive the change faster than the technology departments. So what I'll kind of end with on this slide, because it is wholly positive, is that the story is not all about growth, productivity and upside. With all opportunities, there are some risks and threats that we have to consider to our business. So if we can consider that information is now a currency and IT is absolutely mission critical to a business, everyone on this call is going to be custodian of valuable data. They're going to rely on IT systems, on applications, on data to run their businesses. And by embracing IT and pushing for this innovation, organisations have just become more open and more interconnected than ever before. So a challenge that we all share is identifying our most valuable information and our most valuable IT systems and assets. Once we've done that, we can start to understand the risks that we face and begin to assess our security posture and capability at a point in time, because things change all the time.
So you're saying this in terms of, I mean, if you're thinking about you have a fire in the house, this is the thing that you would make sure that you grab or make sure is stored away securely that could be protected from any fire. This is the most important thing to your household, thus the most important thing to your business.
Correct, and I think we do it already. You know, I think where we choose to put assets of value is kind of a conscious decision. You know, how we choose to secure the premises or in the physical world that we live in is kind of clear and considered. I just wonder if that translates online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very clear. I mean, you have your computer, you have your data, you just assume that it's secure. I have an antivirus, good enough. Yeah,
and one of the points I've made at a couple of presentations I've given recently is that when somebody loses information in the digital sense, they don't lose it. They still have their copy. So it's just that somebody else has it too, so that they don't really feel the sense of loss or the impact that you might feel in a physical theft or a kind of burglary or a break-in.
Yeah. There's. I mean, I don't see my wedding album gone. You know,
it's still there. Someone else has just made a copy. So as we go through this presentation, think of security as being about two things. Think about the protection of data and the keeping systems up and available. Okay, because organisations, just have to start to consider the impact a cyber event would have on operations, on customers, on employees, on their brand.
Yeah.
And where it gets really challenging is balancing kind of how likely with how bad would the consequence be.
And I know Danny's going to get into the data in just a minute, but do you think businesses are in a position where, I mean, even when we're seeing it happen to Home Depot or happen to Target or, to an online retailer, do you think it's still a case of, well, it's not going to happen to me? in the same way that you maybe not put on a seatbelt because I'm not going to get into the 4-car pileup on the highway. Is that what you're seeing?
I think there's definitely a consciousness around it now, and I think the fact that the cyber issue has reached the board level, it is on the minds of the executives, and from the conversations we have, I don't think any organisation can ever say that security is not a priority to them, or that they're not focusing on it right now. There are other aspects of technology where they're going to say, look, we did that last year, we'll have another look in a few years' time. We'll accept it being not quite good enough.
Right.
I don't think people can say that about security.
Especially cybersecurity when things are changing, daily.
Yeah, and things are changing daily, and it's harder and harder for organisations because the bad guy kind of landscape keeps changing too. So, the mask on the screen symbolises, the anonymous threat, a hacktivist group. Online hacktivism wasn't something that we thought about maybe just a few short years ago. So we refer to the different adversaries as threat actors, and there are a whole bunch of them that you have to consider. The problem is the list only tends to be additive. So as time goes by, the basic threats that bothered you years ago, they kind of continue. Mm-hmm. In fact, they probably grow because it gets easier for people to commit online crime. But they're being joined by more advanced ones, more organised ones with far better capability. So we're at a point in time now where we're kind of witnessing the industrialisation of hacking and the rise of crime as a service, which reduces the barrier to entry for criminals. And these services come with an SLA. Even the bad guys are looking to the service provider model because it just makes it easier for them to focus on the thing they want to do, which is steal things. So, you can rent denial of service attacks for as little as a few dollars an hour.
Really?
Just keep feeding the meter. Network logons for Fortune 500 companies can be found for a few dollars each. Once you gain access, is down to the criminal, but the service provider model exists.
Interesting.
And of course, organisations have to look at the insider threat too, which is, it's not so sinister, it's not as deliberately menacing, but there are well-known deliberate data leakage events like we saw with Snowden and Bradley Manning,
right,
and through WikiLeaks. And
right. We think of that as being this noble act of bringing transparency, but ultimately what it was an attack.
It was an attack, and the funny thing is, if you poll the audience, not on this call, but generally, most people did see that as a noble act.
Right. Yeah.
But if people are just sending company data, company secrets, customer records, financial data, pricing information, there's kind of nothing noble in that. That's just criminal. Mm-hmm. But it's not deliberate. It's accidental too. So humans are humans, and we're kind of flawed. So guys click on links, they browse to sites they shouldn't, they lose laptops, they send email unencrypted to the cloud, they send it to their Hotmail accounts. Mm-hmm. You accidentally send it to the wrong recipient. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different ways that bad things can happen, and you have to look at the different options as they relate to your business and consider what measures you're going to put in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like it's the people aspect is one of the keys here. Is personal behavior. It's training your employees, and it's making sure they understand what's going on. That's
absolutely true. What I've tried to outline in the previous 3 slides isn't so much the challenge that faces the SMB, it's the challenge that faces all of us. It's not biased towards a particular industry, but I suggest that the only key difference would either be the scale or the information that's being targeted.
Right.
The rest of it's kind of largely similar across everything. So what it boils down to for organisations in terms of their resilience and their ability to prevent first, because prevention's ideal, but then also detect and respond, is, what do you do across the 4 processes on the screen? People, process controls, and governance. And this is really where the difference lies, or the challenge for the SMB comes real compared to the enterprise. Typically, but not necessarily always, the SMB is going to lack the capital, the resources, the time, and the expertise of skills that an enterprise can rely on. I was in regional Victoria last week speaking to a number of small and medium companies. None of them are running 24/7 online kind of shops. They're online, but no one's at the controls through the hours of darkness. And unfortunately, kind of criminals are working all the time. Mm-hmm. So they do have some blind spots and some gaps. Now at Telstra, we're putting an increasing amount of focus into how we address and service the SME market. Scaling down our solutions and our services so that we can bring enterprise quality to the mid-tier is a focus of ours. We recently formed a mid-market practice who exists to do exactly that. We've got a keen focus on how we make our consulting offerings and our service offerings kind of SMB appropriate or SMB ready.
Right.
So we recognise it's a challenge. Possibly it's a bigger challenge than solving the challenges of the enterprise, because everyone's focused on that.
And the reason for this, and not to get too infomercially, but I mean, is this because 2-3 years ago there really wasn't a challenge to the SMB space?
So it's a couple of things. I think the awareness has clearly increased.
Right.
People are more tuned into the cyber threat. We talked about the barrier to entry lowering. So there are more criminals out there targeting more organisations.
Right.
I think the value of information has become clearer, and it's not always about stealing credit cards. Okay, which is kind of obvious and domain of the financials.
Right. It's the obvious. I have 3 in my wallet right now. So it's the one that I can easily connect to.
Yeah, and as the enterprise gets better at making it harder for criminals, the criminals are looking for the next obvious target. So they're just kind of looking at who hasn't got the protection in place.
Right. Sure.
There's ways and means to figure out who's not protected, and then you go after those guys. So there's a bunch of reasons contributing to it.
Yeah. So thank you, and I suppose we'll move on now, and you go ahead and bring Danny into the conversation.
Yeah. So let me just kind of transition to Danny by kind of introducing the main substance of this session. As I said earlier on, Telstra is soon to release its 2014 Cyber Security Report. This is the first such report that's being produced by an Australian telco. And it's entirely focused on our local market. So we're going to be looking at the experiences of Australian organisations. We'll look at the risks they face, and we're trying to offer guidance on how they can better detect and mitigate some of these risks and threats. To produce the report, we brought together local data from key vendors and technology partners, primary research that we conducted with Frost & Sullivan, and also the unique visibility that Telstra has in terms of what it sees across its fixed and mobile networks, but also its own security operations centre skills. So in terms of customers that contributed to the report, we wanted to make sure we had good representation of the market. We didn't go and poll security guys from the enterprise. So 60% of the respondents were from SMB organisations, and as much as 50% of organisations were from outside of IT or IT security. So our primary objective in developing this report is raising awareness of the issue and helping organisations make better choices and take actions to manage kind of risk. So, we hope when the report becomes available next week, you're going to find it interesting, you're going to think the insights are usable, and you're going to be able to act upon some of the advice and recommendations in there. So at this point, I'm going to cross to a colleague of mine, Danny Rostevsky, who's going to kind of, take it from here and take people through some of the findings and the insights. So thanks everybody again, and I'll speak to you shortly.
Thanks, Dave. So today I'm going to talk about some of the insights taken from Telstra's Cyber Security Report, and largely focus on 5 key areas that I think are of interest to this audience, particularly around topics that are important for small and medium businesses. The first topic that I want to cover off is the focus on security threats and trends. So I'll talk a bit about how the security landscape is evolving and the dominant trends affecting businesses, and generally what to be mindful of when it comes to protecting your own business from these. The second area I'd like to discuss is security awareness within organisations. And I think the importance of this topic is often overlooked, or at least understated. And in most cases, it's often the first step to building a great culture within your organisation, a great security culture that is within your organisations. So I do want to spend a bit of time discussing the insights that we have gathered about security awareness, particularly as it relates to employees, senior managers within organisations, or even business partners that you might be dealing with. The third key topic that I'm going to delve into is around readiness and maturity within organisations, particularly around how how they see themselves capable of handling and responding to security incidents, which is equally as important as having the action plan obviously in place in the first instance. The fourth topic I'll talk about is security adoption. We'll take a look at how security affects technology take-up within organisation, and particularly around the perceived risks associated with these. And there is some cases, a rather negative stigma around security, especially when it comes to technology adoption. So I'll try and kind of attribute the ways organisations can address this. And lastly, I'll finish off with the topic that will give you a bit of insight into the investment decisions and behaviours organisations have related to security solutions. And I think that will tie off, hopefully, some of the other insights that we discussed previously. And overall, that should hopefully give you a good rounding of the insights that we've included in the reports, in the cybersecurity report, but there'll be a lot more detailed in the report when it's released, and you'll get a chance to look at it in a bit more deeper detail yourselves once it's released. So let's begin with the first topic, threats and trends. And first of all, let me start out by saying there's a significant amount of noise out there about the magnitude of security threats globally, and it can be confusing, especially for smaller organisations like yourselves, on what you should focus on to begin with. So we asked organisations to detail the nature of their most recent security incidents, and we found 45% of organisations indicated that traditional viruses that were delivered via rogue emails were the main cause of that security incident. And this is consistent with what we see in Telstra also. By far, traditional threats like viruses seem to be the most dominant plague in most organisations, and they're typically delivered via email also. And it's not a significant surprise, given email in most cases is the primary use of comms within organisations. So just don't underestimate the damage that traditional attacks can have on your business, and make sure that those are probably the first threats that you address as part of your security controls within your organisation. On a related topic, if we look at the malware delivery in Australia over the last year, on the next statistic to the right, phishing attacks were the fastest growing delivery method. And for those that don't know what phishing attacks are, they're no more than scams that pretend to be legitimate representations of real companies or people in some cases, which they try and use to extract personal or financial information for malicious activity. Phishing attacks can be delivered a number of ways, but the most common method is them being sent to a victim in the form of a targeted email, and this is sometimes referred to spear phishing. But just to give you an example of a type of a phishing attack, I bet some of you, if not all of you, probably would have received an email from either a bank, an online company like eBay or perhaps Amazon, a postal service like Australia Post, or one that I've received recently from UPS, or even Facebook, for instance, requesting you to either log on to a website with your credentials or open an attachment of some sort that all look suspicious and not quite right in terms of how it's represented in either in an email or how the website might represent itself. So hopefully most of you would have noticed that they weren't legitimate correspondence from organisations that they were pretending to be from. So,
Danny, it's funny that you bring that up, because I've heard, I've gotten those emails, and sometimes it's a really obvious spelling mistake that they'll make that sort of cues you in. But I feel like if there was some time put in, some effort put into actually making these a little more legitimate, just somebody to proofread, they would fool me. Dave?
Yes,
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Funny. There's a couple of things to that point. Is the first of which is users are users, okay, and curiosity killed the cat. The second thing is oftentimes the corporate controls that have been put in place to stop this isn't enough when the user, undeterred by curiosity, pulls out the blue cable, either connects to their home Wi-Fi, puts in their 4G card, and then browses to take a look.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen instances of that as well. So, got to not rely on the controls. You've got to help the users too.
Cool. Sorry, Danny, back to you.
Sure. And obviously along that good advice, if it does look suspicious, don't click on it, question it. And most organisations will contact you by snail mail, in other words, regular mail, or another method where they can verify themselves and you as a client. So, and just lastly on phishing attacks, what makes them really popular amongst criminals is, like Dave mentioned just previously, there's easy access to phishing attack toolkits, and they're readily available through public websites. And no surprise that most of these are relatively easy to use, even to a novice. So they're quite dominant in the threat landscape, and certainly growing significantly. And lastly, the other reasons why their popularity has somewhat increased over the last few years is the relative ease to deceive victims, into believing, as we just mentioned, believing phishing scams are legitimate, and this is just the nature of humans, somewhat. We tend to be trustworthy of people, but it always pays to be a bit sceptical when it comes to comms like this. Hopefully, we tend to think of Australia lagging behind the rest of the world when it comes to threats and attacks, but surprisingly, Australia is second to the US for top countries hosting malicious files. And the top industries that these threats tend to target, to no one's surprise, is financial institutions like banks, credit card agencies, and online trading companies like eBay, Amazon, and or what you have. Other key insights to the top right of the slide is that trends are moving up the stack. In other words, targeting application and the information that resides within them. Information these days can spread across a number of applications, especially web applications, and it can either be stationary in terms of the information they store, or in motion. So when you're downloading, for argument's sake, your data across the internet. And we found that Windows machines are the most vulnerable. So as a key point, patching should be mandatory for all your workstation and servers within your business environment. Gartner quotes something like 97% of known vulnerabilities can be prevented by organisations simply just patching. So it's kind of an important consideration that you should consider as part of your security plan. And that's really an extraordinarily relatively easy way to mitigate against these application threats. And lastly, we tend to think about threats coming from external to the organisation, and Dave touched on insider threats. And you'll be surprised that the companies that we also surveyed also stated that the likely source that they thought their latest incident was from was internal to their organisation. Now, this doesn't always mean that employees are being malicious, but certainly there are incidents where employees may be unknowingly sending sensitive company data out on the internet that may be exposed to criminals. So, for instance, sending credit card data information via plain text in an email or uploading customer contact list to your private Dropbox account. I mean, this information can be intercepted and exploited by criminals if you're not careful. So the insider threat is real and needs to be considered. So just to summarise on this topic, so my key takeouts, protect yourself against traditional attacks and threats like viruses, as they can be the most dominant within your organisation. Phishing attacks are on the rise. Make sure that you have these as part of your security education plan amongst employees so they are aware of them, and more importantly, they know what to do when they encounter one. Patch your applications and operating systems. This is a must, and it will go a long way to mitigating against known vulnerabilities, especially at the application layer. And consider threats that may come from within your organisation and how you can minimise these. So if we move on to the next topic, I want to talk about security awareness within organisations. And it was good to see that organisations fared well when it came to aligning their security postures with their business objectives. And what we mean by this is, say your business had a 24/7 online element to service or sell to your customers. That would be the business objectives that you would want to protect. And your security posture would obviously need to reflect this in the four areas highlighted there on the left, which include policies, your resources and the security controls, etc., that you'll need to have in place as part of your posture. But the more important telling statistics in employee awareness of organisational security policies, and approximately 69% weren't fully across their company security policies along these lines. So some examples of security policies can be, can I surf non-business websites during work? Can I download files from the internet and store these on workplace machines? Or can I bring my own software from home and install it at work? These all contribute to potential risks to the organisation if they don't follow up policies. So it's important for your employees to be aware of these, because there's no point in having these if they're not going to be actioned by employees or enforced.
Hey, Danny, I'm going to break in really quick and ask, I mean, because the statistics look like, there is an awareness at the top level, which is fantastic, but ultimately, who then is responsible for passing that along? Dave, you want to, please?
Yeah, so thanks, Justin. I think, so I don't know if people saw it earlier on in one of the slides when we introduced the report, but we leveraged a quote from Newton Lee in there. Security is not the responsibility of IT and technology. Okay, this is everyone's responsibility. So users need to begin to understand the risks and the consequences involved in the decisions that they're making and make better choices. The role of IT is to help educate them and help enable them to make better choices. Mm-hmm. So it's an everyone problem, and as soon as people start thinking like that and stop looking at the poor guy or girls in IT, I think overall companies are going to be better off.
Right. So, Danny, I want to keep going on this and remind folks on the call, if you missed any of the statistics, I mean, obviously these are dense, and we do want to keep moving through these so we can handle your questions as well. You can download this from the Resources tab on the bottom of your screen. So, Danny, continue.
Thanks. And just to note about on the bottom left there, senior management involved with security decision making is extremely important also. It's not only just employees, and we tend to think about security as a technology issue. Security is not just an IT administrator problem, it's a board issue, and security issues can affect your company in many ways. So it's extremely important to kind of get that visibility to all senior levels within your organisations, and for them to kind of take accountability. And my last point I just wanted to make is consider the security implications at the start of every major initiative or project. A lot of organisations still try and retrofit security solutions once a project has been delivered, and this not only adds additional unnecessarily cost, but in some cases may not even provide the best protection for your intellectual property. So it's pleasing to see that at least organisations are considering security at the early stages of projects, but a bit more improvement is required. So just really briefly, key takeout: security is everyone's responsibility within your organisation, including your senior management team, and don't assume that everyone is immune to being involved with security within your business, including your business partners that may share sensitive customer information or your own intellectual property. Train your employees so their level of awareness of security companies is fairly well understood. And make sure that security is part of your work culture, and consider security implications at the start of every major project or initiative. In other words, embed security into the way you operate and run your business. So on the next topic, security readiness and maturity. In this topic, I'll explore briefly how ready or mature organisations are, particularly handling or responding to security incidents. So to begin with, 41% of organisations we surveyed indicated that they had a major security incident of some sort, with over a quarter within the last year. Now, having said that, 33 also indicated they never had a security incident, and in some cases organisations may not know that they have been compromised. So the amount
Danny, is this a point where, yeah, well, that's actually a really good point, is they don't know they've been compromised, but is this a one where they're lulled into a sense of security?
Yeah, exactly. So we do get instances where we do get involved with a security engagement for customer, and they do have a sense of false safety as part of their environment, and we do find hidden vulnerabilities that they haven't been discovered before. So it's important in terms of, and we do talk about this a bit later, of reviewing and constantly monitoring your environment, because you do not always pick up threats at the early stages of when they do become prevalent in your environment.
I want to move on from this one fairly quickly, because we've got a lot to talk about yet, and we're running a bit behind time. But I think it sounds like from the people that are on this call that they're in a position where they at least understand that there are holes in their security and are looking for some security. So is that what people come to you? Do they come to you with an awareness that there is an issue, or do they come with you like there might be an issue?
Oh, look, there's varying stages of maturity within organisations. So some do acknowledge that they may not have the right security policies or posture in place, and they do come to us for advice. But it's always good practice, even if you do think that you're capable of handling security events and you do have the right security controls in place, just to do regular health checks, because it's always important just to get a third-party kind of view on your environment and just make sure that you haven't missed anything that you may have overlooked.
Great. So why don't we move on to the next slide?
Sure. So on technology adoption, now sometimes security is seen as a bit of a barrier to technology adoption, and this is the wrong mindset most organisations have today. In other words, organisations see security tending to add costs and sometimes delay to initiatives, and is often overlooked or not fully implemented. So we studied the key technologies being adopted by organisations, and we try to get our understanding of potential barriers that might prevent or delay the onboarding of these. And not surprisingly, security does feature quite significantly as a major concern. And it's these concerns that are holding some organisations back from investing in major technologies, together with the lack of readiness of being prepared during a security breach. But the two main technologies that come up more often than not were around the adoption of cloud infrastructure and mobility solutions. So overall, I mean, cloud adoption, the threats and concerns around there were largely related to denial of service or network outages, theft of company data, and in fact human error also features quite predominantly as a key concern there. It signals that most organisations are not prepared to deal with the basic security risks associated with these technologies that can have a substantial, kind of business impact. And it's hard. I mean, we do realise that some of these technologies are in some cases emerging, and they're hard to have businesses get their head around on all of their implications, let alone the security aspects of them. But it is good to see that security organisations do have the core security controls in place as it relates to cloud infrastructure with network firewalls and content security, whether it be web or email, being the most implemented. And if we have a look at denial of service, for instance, which typically is a threat that can take down your hosting environment or applications being hosted, most organisations haven't considered this as a key security control. So although they've got the basics right when it comes to cloud infrastructure, there is elements of that they need to consider as part of the holistic protection of that environment. And lastly, on that point, the perceived risk with BYOD in the workspace, tend to relate around company malware or loss of data protection. And again, it shouldn't overall prevent companies or organisations adopting these technologies. Security should be seen as an enabler if done properly, and it certainly will reduce costs in the long term by preventing security risk within the organisation. So that's kind of the key takeout. And make sure you prioritise your technology investments. Again, make sure your investments in security are also an integral part of your implementation and support plan of supporting these technologies. So,
that's a great point, Danny. And I think it's important to remember that, as cheap as I am, I have to recognize that I have to pay for something to protect my house, whether that be, insurance, whether that be a new security system, whatever. And the same goes for a business, that ultimately some money is going to have to be spent somewhere to help protect this. But it's important to figure out the right ways to spend that money. And we'll ask a question in just a moment relating to that. But before we get there, I do want to talk a little bit about the shadow IT and the BYOD idea. And first of all, Dave, why don't you explain for me, what is shadow IT?
So that's a good question. I think shadow IT is just kind of, it's not officially supported by the company. Mm-hmm. So shadow IT is a term that's being thrown around a lot. Sometimes people are misrepresenting it and using it in the same way they would BYOD. But I kind of think it continues to be a hot topic, and it's often thought of as a problem for an organisation. And if it's not well managed, then it absolutely can be. But as we've said before, users are they're driving things now. They're making choices. Shadow IT actually helps drive technology innovations in technology and IT departments. So users adopt shadow services not because they want to do harm, but because they want it to be good. Mm-hmm. They want to be more productive, and they're just finding better ways of working faster than the technology department can adopt them and make them right. Standard or corporate approved.
Well, yeah, when I was with Clear Channel about 4 or 5 years ago in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I have an older iPhone, and I really wanted to use this to get my work email, but it wasn't supported by corporate. Fortunately or unfortunately, my IT guy knew a workaround that could make it work. Our local guy on the ground, but ultimately, that's not then being controlled through company systems, and there's a lot of private, sensitive data that was on that phone that was operating in the shadows.
So shadow IT by itself is not bad, but risky decisions or risky choices.
It creates that risk that then can cause the problem down the road.
Correct. And if you don't have visibility of it, then you have no hope in hell of managing it. That's the challenge.
Yeah. So Danny, I'm gonna jump this ahead here, and I do want to ask a question for our audience, and that's particularly dealing with that spend, because ultimately money is being spent, and I want to know how you feel. Do you feel like it's being put in the right place, or do you feel like you're just throwing money against a wall at a problem, hoping that it will be solved?
So thanks, Justin. And the reason we've asked that question is because you'll see this in the recommendations we make later in this presentation, is that we kind of feel like this is the starting point. if you don't have a handle on your most valuable information and your most critical assets and systems, how do you kind of move to step two?
Right.
And so everyone's somewhere on this journey, and we'd hope that people would have a view. But what we need to try and do is figure out whether the strategy you've started down or the decisions you've made in the past are still good decisions today. Mm-hmm. So, if you're not sure, obviously that's something we'd love to help with, but we think this is important for anyone.
Let's hear from our audience, and we've got a mix, and they're somewhat confident, it seems to be the takeaway here, that people have a concept but aren't really sure. And what's the easy answer for a way to assess whether or not you're spending in the right way?
Yeah, and I think people accept and recognise that it's always going to be imperfect. Okay, you cannot be 100% secure 100% of the time, but what you can do is just focus on what matters most. Mm-hmm. So, routine and regular, vulnerability scans, penetration testing, checking whether users have a problem with clicking on links. Those sorts of things are just a way of assessing the effectiveness of your controls and your policies. And then you've got to constantly adjust. So, that's great answers. We're very pleased to see that.
Yeah. So let's go through these investment decisions, and I think this bounces off of that topic, is figuring out where we're spending our money and where is going to have the biggest impact, and who is also spending the money. I think is a really important question to ask.
Great, thanks, Justin. And so one of the most obvious questions that we asked organisations related to this topic is, do organisations see their IT security budgets either increasing, decreasing, or even remaining the same over the next 12 months? 67%, and this is SMB data specifically indicated that they will remain about the same. Now this puts obviously a lot of pressure on business, not only to keep up with the emerging threats that they need to deal with, but they also need to have the right security governance and policies in place to be able to respond and mitigate threats when they do happen. Everyone understands, and I'm sure I don't need to tell this to this audience, that resources aren't unlimited in any organisation, so it's important to prioritise your spending on your cybersecurity efforts. One of the most effective ways to do this, as a starting point at least, is to undertake a basic self-assessment or via the help of a third party against your security organisation or security posture, and measure these against a industry best practice. And there are a few out there. I personally like the SANS 20 critical security controls that organisations can map how effective they are against these and align them to their business outcomes, as we spoke about in previous slides. Now, SANS is a company that specialises in information security and cyber security training for organisations, and I encourage you to visit the website if you're not familiar with it. But there are many others, including the Australian Signals Directorate, which publishes the Information Security Manual. On the bottom of the page, we asked what services organisation will require professional assistance within the next year or so. Of the 59% that indicated that they would need help, cloud computing, mobility and virtualization were among the top areas. And again, this is consistent with the technology adoption areas that organisations are looking to implement in. So we don't expect organisations to have the most experienced staff or capability to be experts in every single technology. So it's important to consider, when you are implementing security controls or implementing new technologies, to ensure that you get the right advice and the right solution the first time. I think
it ultimately comes back to having, figuring out what's right for your business before you invest in a security system for that. There's so much work that needs to be done before we even get to the security question. Make sure we know what we're securing.
Absolutely, yes, spot on. And if we have a look at the areas in industry that will be investing in the next 12 to 18 months, again, wireless and cloud come up as key areas, but not forgetting, again, traditional network and content and also identity security solutions are just as important. These form the backbone of security postures within any organisation and need to be considered as part of any investment decisions. And you'll notice that retailers specifically tend to invest in more in those particular areas, as they should, because we already discussed getting the basics right the first time is a good security foundation. So, just to recap, prioritise your IT spending on the most critical assets that you need to protect. And getting the solutions right the first time will yield the best results. And don't be scared to actually ask for external help to implement some of the security solutions. If you might not have the skills or resources to do it yourself, getting it right the first time, I can't iterate, will save you time and effort in the long run. So just to kind of finish off there, hopefully it's given you some good insights into the key focus areas, and it's good to see that businesses can do, can kind of are actually on the right track with a lot of these different areas in terms of getting it to a level that's acceptable, but we do kind of also note there's some improvement in some of these areas that they need to actually undertake themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Danny. And I want to remind folks, the full report will be available in about a week or so, and there will be a lot more insights in there. So let's talk about what businesses now can do, because I think these are the key takeaways, and we've got some questions coming in I do want to hit on. So Dave, why don't you run me through, what can we do?
Cool. So thanks, Justin. So the recommendations that we're about to kind of outline on the screen, it's the same set of recommendations that we're making to all customers, all organisations, different shapes, different sizes, different industries, and it's what we consider to be just good cyber hygiene. Okay, and we've covered some of this as we've gone through the presentation. So, point one there, protect what matters. I think people understand that, and judging by the response to the poll question, I think people believe they're already doing it, which is fantastic. As long as you just continue to kind of refine, review and adjust, because information in particular has a particular value at a point in time. So that can change quite regularly. The second recommendation we're making, and we talked about this as well, assess, test and train. This is about risk assessment, the testing of the effectiveness of your controls to kind of mitigate the risks as they relate to you, and train the users, because we believe the user to be the weak link. If you're going to go through the process of 2, then you kind of need to spend time on 3, which is also why we'd recommend that anybody you engage in 2 should be delivering you a pretty thorough outbriefing, advising you, guiding you through it, making sure you understand the impact and consequence of what's been revealed in some of the exercises in 2. This one's kind of a given, but it's hard to really nail how you do it. Mm-hmm. Okay, we just come back to the securities and everyone concerned. So from the top down, the business needs to feel like that, endorse it, promote it. This is really a challenge more for organisations that do have a security team or a technology team, and how do they kind of bridge the gap between IT events and how that relates to risk for the business.
Right. Just assuming it's somebody else's problem.
Correct. So don't talk about ports and protocols. Talk about the impact to an application and how that impacts a customer or sales productivity. If people can accept and understand that bad stuff happens and things can go wrong despite all of the investments and the focus in controls, then you kind of got to be prepared. So it's best to kind of plan for an incident when you're not in the middle of an incident. So this is both from a technology point of view, how do you get back to business and resume BAU, but also how do you manage any fallout in the media or with your customers? Because we've seen situations where people have been compromised and the press have found out and they've looked for a comment, mm-hmm. and the organisation's offered no comment at all, and that just kind of fuels the fire.
Yeah.
So get out ahead of it.
Mm-hmm. That's the general PR strategy for me, but yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
And 7 goes without saying, and of course we're going to say that because it's the business we're in, but it's also the business we're in because we think that that's a kind of important business.
Yeah.
Perhaps more so for the SMB organisations that don't have the benefit of their own teams. So, we're just saying, can we augment your in-house capability? Can we bring a capability that you couldn't achieve on your own? Mm-hmm. And if you think that by working with a service provider you can raise the bar, then just explore it. And quite honestly, we want to have that conversation because that's our business. but we think it makes sense.
Yeah. So what we've done today is give somewhat of a survey overview of various security threats and things you can do, but we do also want to dig into in the future very specific issues and some of those that we talked about before, where we are going to see issues come up, be that in cloud, be that through social media, through endpoint technology. So I want to hear from you in the audience what you would like to hear in the future and dig into, and what you're seeing as issues. So as we're getting some answers, I do want to ask some of the questions that have come in particular about SANS 20 controls. Dave, do you know anything, or Danny, can you speak to SANS 20 controls, the critical controls?
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, largely they relate to. So largely, I mean, SANS in general are private organisations that actually list ways a organisation can actually implement security controls, and they go through the top 20. So they relate right from the traditional perimeter security, so protecting the boundaries of your organisations, right up to wireless security controls, application controls, and infrastructure controls at that point. So, look, I mean, it certainly would, and like I mentioned before, encourage people to visit the website, and there's some good training material that helps organisations at least prioritise the security controls that fit their own environment specifically.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you, Danny. So let's also talk about risk mitigation, because I think obviously having a problem is terrible, but what can we do to sort of take that away? And I mean, if we are in an area where there are a variety of businesses interacting with each other. It's no longer just you on the corner selling lemonade. You have to get the lemon from somewhere. You have to deal with somebody to build the stand. We are all interacting significantly. And if there are weak links down that chain, we're going to run into issues. So what can we do to help mitigate that from the people that we're dealing with?
Yeah, and a question was asked earlier on around supply chain risk and whether SMB risk represents a risk to enterprise and vice versa. And I just think